Thank you for joining us for another episode of Spotlight Houston, where we bring you the best of the people, places, and events in Houston. This week, we sit down with Dr. Jesse Esparza to talk about preserving Houston's Hispanic history. Spotlight Houston is a production of Story Zone Media. This is episode 89 with an original air date of Monday, May 27th, 2024. And now your host, Blanca Quezada.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Spotlight Houston. Houston's history has been created throughout the centuries by many men and women who were just incredible, but they were also from various cultures. These diverse cultures helped to contribute to the city's growth, which is now considered the fourth largest city in the country. But of course, its history started before the settlers began to move into, I guess, even before it was a Texas territory and even before it was officially Texas here. But there were many different Native American tribes, Mexicans, Spaniards, and other people from maybe down in Central America and South America. But they also helped develop this country, and we don't hear about it. What I have found interesting is so much of this history and of these people is not really heard of and not even really in schools. It's just lost. So I wanted to find out a little bit more about our history here. And so my guest today is actually going to talk to us about how now we can help preserve our Hispanic roots in Houston and maybe even across the country so it will not disappear. And so with me today is Dr. Jesse Esparza. He's an associate professor and interim chair of the Department of History at Texas Southern University and here in Houston. His area of expertise is, of course, on history, and not just regular history, but history of Latinos in the United States, emphasizing civil rights, activism. And so Dr. Esparza's manuscript, Raza Schools, A Fight for Latino Educational Autonomy in a West Texas borderlands town, was published by the University of Oklahoma Press as part of the New Directions in Tejano History series. It has received 2 book awards. Congratulations. 2024 Outstanding Book Award for the Texas Association of Chicanos in Higher Education and the 2024 Tejano Foco Nonfiction Book Award by the National Association of Chicana and Chicano Studies. Dr. Esparza teaches Mexican American, Texas, and civil rights history. He received his BA and a master's degree from Southwest Texas State University and a PhD from the University of Houston. So from our great city here. So congratulations, Dr. Esparza. I had to let my listeners know all about you, exactly who and what you've done, because it's amazing. So it's really an honor to have you on the show.
Blanca, thank you very much. The honor is mine. I'm truly honored and blessed to have this opportunity to meet you and speak with you and to share a little bit with your audience. So thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. And so first of all, Dr. Esparza, what inspired you to become a professor in the history of Latinos in the United States?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. I'm originally from San Antonio. I was born and raised there. And I came up through the schools, K through 12, they're public schools. And the school that I went to was predominantly Mexican American. The city then, like now, was predominantly Mexican American. But then when I left the city to go to school, when I went to college and I went to school in San Marcos, which was probably no more than 40 minutes north of San Antonio, the world was different for me then. I very quickly became part of the minority group and very visibly was in the minority. And then like many undergraduates, I was kind of stumbling my way through college. I was changing my major, it seemed almost every semester. And then what I did too was I began to sort of feel lonely and sort of feel like I was without community. I was homesick. I joined an organization. It's called the Association of Mexican American Students, or AMAS for short. And I had learned that it was one of the oldest organizations on that campus, a mostly white campus established there during the Chicano movement in 1967. And then it had gone dormant and then it got revived. And when I was there, in the early 2000s, they had revived it and I joined it. And my job in that organization was to speak 1 minute, 2 minute, 3 minutes about the history of Mexican Americans, the history of Mexico, the history of Mesoamericans. And I did that as a member of that organization. And it really kind of just, I was reading about things that I hadn't learned in schools K through 12. And then I was kind of making the connections between that history and my own family's history. And I realized I didn't know much about not even my own family's history. And so then I decided, you know what, let me go explore this discipline and let me see what I can learn about my family, my community, and see what happens. And it ended up putting me on a trajectory towards 3 degrees so that I'm a trained historian now because of it.
I'm glad you did that. I'm glad you did that. I remember the same thing. During school, I never really heard the history of Mexican Americans here in Texas or anywhere else. I just happened to find out through reading different books, picking up books and asking a lot of questions. But it's been a very interesting history that I think that not just Mexican Americans need to know about, but all the diverse cultures that live here in our city.
Yeah. Indeed.
Sometimes I think that the community here gets a little confused with the way that the terms that are used to describe us or ourselves, such as Hispanics, Chicanos, Latinx, or even Latinos. And of course, there are other words. So you think that's kind of confusing to people?
It can be. It can be confusing and it could be very divisive. I think that I recognize and I really appreciate it and I acknowledge the way people identify and self-identify. That's not really something that sort of drives a wedge between me and that person. I consider myself a Chicano and I'm a proud Chicano. I don't ever apologize for being Chicano or doing the history of Chicanos. But that doesn't mean that I have issues with you because you identify as some other kind of way. I embrace you as a person, as a sister, as a brother. I embrace you as a community member. And everyone, we can all have differences. We're not a homogenous group. We're a different, diverse group. We're a heterogeneous group. So that's okay for me. It's not a divisive issue like it is for others, but it can be very confusing and it can be very divisive. I just don't let it be. I read and I talk to people. I listen and I learn. Because I mean, I teach all the time, but we have to listen as much as we teach. And that's how you really sort of can understand things.
For people that have never heard the word Chicano, what does it actually mean?
So, okay. So the word Chicano is going to gain some real popularity and real movement coming out of the 1960s here in the United States when American Latinos are going to sort of redefine this term and wear it as a badge of honor. A term that instills pride, a term that identifies them with their indigenous past and their indigenous ancestry. So that to be Chicano was to be someone of Mexican extraction, living in what is the geopolitical region of the United States, but who understands their history that goes all the way back 9,000 BC years ago to the formation of ancient civilizations in what was known as Mesoamerica, Middle America. Present-day South Mexico and places like that, the Olmec, the Toltec, the Zapotec, the Mayan, and so on. And so that's when that term kind of has the definition that it currently has at present. And that term actually, the word Chicano is a very ancient term. It actually comes out of the word Mexicano, which is a derivative of the Mexica, and going all the way back to the time of the Aztecs, as we know them, called themselves the Mexica, and we know them as the Aztec because Europeans would say, oh, you come from Aztlan, then you're the Aztecs. And so, but the word Chicano comes from Mexicano, which comes from Mexica, which is the original name that the Aztec peoples gave themselves. And so it's really an indigenous term that comes down thousands of years or at least hundreds of years. And that activists during the 1960s are going to redefine because for a moment there in the 1920s and 30s, and I think more so in the 1930s, it was an ethnic term that was used to talk about the illiterate and the uneducated and the working classes, the poor people. And it was a derogatory term used by Mexican Americans against the working class Mexican Americans. And so it had a negative stigma. But in the 1960s, activists are going to say, nah, no more. This is a brand new term. We are a brand new people. And we're going to wear this with a badge of honor. And that's sort of how the term exists today, the word Chicano.
Even a word that's been using a word that's been around for centuries. Yeah. So the other thing too that I've noticed is that sometimes just because we speak Spanish or look Hispanic, I don't know what for people looking Hispanic is supposed to be, but in the community, a lot of the community considers us to be all Mexican. But over the years, that has changed. Now we're from Central America, South America, Cuba, and the Dominican Republic. And we're contributing to this city in many different ways for it to grow. Even people from that have the African descent or are Asian come from these countries as well, from Latin America, Central America, but we still get in defined in different ways and into these little like we're all in different, even though we're different, we're all considered Mexican.
Yeah, that historically has been sort of what traditionally has happened. Lump everybody in together. Everybody's the same. And that's not the case as you are clearly stating and accurately stating. And even within specific communities, right? And so that all Latinos are not Mexicano, they're not all from Mexico. But even within those communities, even within the ethnic Mexican community, that is to say Mexican and Mexican American, there are in different kinds of ethno-racial peoples who are ethnic Mexican, if you will. As you talked about Afro-Latinos, there's Afro-Mexicanos, there's Mestizo Mexicanos, there's Afro-Mestizos. And so there's different kinds of sort of ethno-racial combinations that exist that further diversify this community. So again, right, we're not the same, we're different, we're diverse. We have sort of different ideas of family, of the afterlife. We have different ways of living. And so it's not a homogenous group. But people often, it's easier to put everybody in that one box. Oh, they're all the same. And no, that's not the case. I mean, Latinos from the Caribbean islands are not the same from Latinos from San Diego, California. They might be the same, but they're probably not the same.
Right. We all have different traditions and cultures, but we speak the same language. Even though sometimes we can use words that sound the same, and they're in Spanish and they sound the same, but they have a different meaning depending on the country you come from.
Yeah. The same thing. Language is a good example of that. The different meanings in language and the different meanings of words that are used across Spanish-speaking languages. And even with indigenous languages, I think that it's our responsibility to the best of our ability to try to recuperate, recover some of those indigenous languages that were taken from our ancestors. But even in those indigenous languages, they'll have some terms are used the same way to identify something or someone, but also they'd be very different. And so it doesn't just apply to Spanish or English or Mandarin that is spoken throughout Latin America. It applies also to those indigenous languages, the first languages spoke throughout Latin America or throughout Mesoamerica.
What term would you use or do you use to describe our mix of cultures and the Spanish-speaking people?
I teach at an HBCU and we really interrogate terms, but I think oftentimes so that everyone is on the same page as there is a lot of information to cover, I use terms like Chicano, I use terms like Latino, I use terms like Latinx, I use terms like the descendants of First People, the indigenous peoples. I like to use the words descendants a lot because it sort of speaks about this long history of Latinos in the U.S. There's another perception that Latinos are recent newcomers to the United States and they're temporary stayers in the United States. And that's not the case either. They have this long history that extends backwards into what is the continental, right? Sort of this continental history. So I like to use terms like the descendants of First Peoples or the descendants of Mesoamericans. But I use a combination of terms just to try to make sure all of my students sort of have different learning styles. And I want to make sure that I hit every sort of learning style that I can. And that includes using a variety of terminology.
Our history has not really been preserved the way it maybe should have been. But now there's this push of making sure that our Hispanic roots are preserved and are part of the history of this country. So, because I know you're into that, I know that you're having a special event, a great event coming up this Saturday, June 1st, that is of great importance to our communities. And also, it's going to be a lot of fun. It's about the main thing, it's about helping us to preserve our family history. And so please tell us all about it.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. So this Saturday, June 1st, in Houston's North Side at the Leonel Castillo Community Center, between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., myself and several other colleagues are putting on a program It's called a history harvest. What it's technically called is Bayou City Policing History Harvest. And it's a harvest day. And it's basically, you're probably saying, well, what's a history harvest? A history harvest is basically an event that's dedicated to recording and preserving the testimonies, the histories of community people, of families, and we record those, we preserve those so that we have scanning machines, and we preserve those, right? These are, to quote a historian who wrote a groundbreaking book called The Injustice Never Leaves You, Monica Martinez, what a fascinating book. She uses a term called valiant acts of preservation. To quote her, these are efforts and attempts to engage in these valiant acts. That's what a history harvest is to preserve the history of a people, to preserve the history of a family, to preserve the history of a community. And so this Saturday, we are inviting anybody and everybody to come and talk to us about a historical moment or an experience, or that of a family member or a friend that's happened in the past. And we want to hear your stories. And so we invite, as we might say in the flyer, La Gente de Houston to come. This event is being sponsored by an organization that was founded here in the city. It's called the Collective of Progressive Educators, or COPE, C-O-P-E. I'm one of the members of the organization, a great friend of mine and colleague, Dr. Carlos Cantu, who teaches at the University of Houston and also here at TSU. He's also one of the founders. We have a board. This organization does, we're a nonprofit, a 501c3, and we got educators from throughout the city who serve on this board. I'm thinking of Dr. Natalie Garza over at ACC. And so this organization is putting on this event, but is putting on the event in partnership with our colleagues in the community, such as Mario Salinas, who is the director there at the community center. And then certainly, I'd be remiss if I did not mention the Recovering the U.S. Hispanic Literary Heritage personnels from the Recovery, as is mostly known. The Recovery Project is basically an archival division of Arte Público Press, which was founded in 1992 and which is housed at the University of Houston, the main campus here. And this is basically a community-focused archive that works to preserve the history of U.S. Latinos and the experience of U.S. Latinos. And at present, they have a massive collection. They have a collection of over 1,500 newspapers and a growing number of archival collections from local Hispanic Latino families throughout the city. And so what Recovery does is they recover this literature and this history and experience, but they also then support the work of others. And so they're sponsoring us, they're underwriting us, they're mentoring us. These mujeres are mentoring us, Carlos and myself, and they're providing students to come and assist that day. They are going to provide the scanning equipment. They have beautiful high-tech scanning equipment that does a fantastic job of when people walk in with their photos or newspaper clippings or other kind of memorabilia, all that will get digitized for them. And they provided training for us. They provided guidance for how to approach this kind of event, how to approach it respectfully and efficiently, right? Not so that we're just grabbing and going. It's a collaborative effort on the part of Recovery to really train us and help us understand the importance of these valiant acts of preservation. But that's what we're doing this coming weekend on June 1st, is we're holding this history harvest. And it would not be done without community partners such as Recovery and without community partners such as the Leonel Castillo Community Center, which is where this is taking place. They're providing us their space.
The Publico has been doing an amazing job at preserving a lot of artifacts and a lot of oral histories, which are my favorite. And so what kind of artifacts or articles should people from the community bring in?
That's also a great question. Thank you. So this one, we're inviting the people to bring anything and everything. A photo of their dad from when he was a teenager, a marriage license, anything that they can talk about, that they want to talk about. We are going to come and we're going to scan that for them. We're going to give them their copy. We're going to put everything on a little USB drive for them, and they can share that with whoever they want. We're going to get a little story of what this item is from them. We're going to record that as well. We can share that with them too, if they want it, and they can do whatever they want with that. And so we're asking people to bring whatever they want. Now, I will say that there is a theme that is tied to this History Harvest. It's called Bayou City Policing History Harvest Day. And it's called that specifically because this idea is birthed out of a book project that Carlos and myself and others are a part of. We're currently working on a book project. It's called Bayou City Policing. That's the tentative title of this book project. And it's under advanced contract with the University of Oklahoma Press. You mentioned them earlier in the introduction, and they have a series, New Directions in Tejano History. And so it'll be a book in that series. But this is a book, basically, it's an edited volume. It's 12 chapters. We have 12 writers, and it's going to basically chronicle about 100-year history of the relationship between Latinos and law enforcement here in the city of Houston. It's going to be the first book of its.
It's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, there's not a book that exists yet. And so it's going to be the
Right.
first of its kind. And it's going to tell, all kinds of stories, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the beautiful. And so we have a very eclectic cast of writers. We got historians, we got educators, we got activists, we got museum directors, we got artists, and they're all going to write their own perspective and interpretations. And so this book project is what kind of started it all. Carlos is one of our writers. He's writing chapter 7. And so we went down into a conference in South Texas, and we were presenting our chapters. We were workshopping, we call it our chapters. And Carlos was really inspired from this plática, from his talk and from the feedback from the audience. And then he says, we got to do something, man. We got to do something else to get this history into the hands or into the laptops of people so that it's not just a book on a bookshelf somewhere. And I was like, but what do you got in mind? Now we have COPE. Now we got this organization, and now we have events like this. This is just the first of many to come, but this is the first one that we want to sort of attempt. We're new to this. We're not as seasoned in doing these kinds of things. I've always been on other teams, and I've worked with several archivists and librarians who know what to do. And I kind of just like, tell me what to do and I'll do it. And so, but now here we are kind of doing it ourselves.
Yeah.
That's why it's called that. So to answer your question, that was a long way to answer your question. We want people to do for this weekend, for this event, is if they can bring items and maybe bring ideas and testimonies and stories they want to share related to the topic of Latinos and law enforcement. Hey, my uncle was one of the first cadets.
Yeah. And the good thing is that people get to keep those items. They don't just drop them off and leave them with you. They get to take them home.
That's correct. We don't stay with anything. With caution and care, we handle it, we scan it. The item goes back with the person and they get a digital version of that. We do ask that we, with their permission, again, this is all kind of in a gift of deed, an in-kind deed gift from them, that we might use it for educational purposes only. But no, nobody leaves anything with us unless they are adamant about leaving something with us. But even then, we're like, let's talk about that too. But no, everybody goes home with what they brought.
So all these materials and recordings that you're going to be getting on Saturday, where are they going to be stored?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. They're going to be stored. They're going to be housed with the recovery team. They have the bandwidth, they have the space, they have the means to house these things, and they'll make it public if the person wants and gives us permission to make it public, or they'll keep it private if that's what the persons want as well. And so we'll do whatever the community member wants us to do respectfully, and we'll honor that. And then, but we want them to come. We want you to come and talk to us, meet other people, and let's engage in these valiant acts of preservation, because 1,000 years from now, we want people to know what it was like in the early 2000s or something like that.
That we existed and we made a difference.
Indeed.
And,
indeed, right? I mean, there's joint efforts to make sure
you're
that.
not only going to, I was going to say, you're not only going to be bringing in your article and doing the oral histories to be preserved, but you're also going to be having a lot of fun, and you're going to get to see a film. You're going to get to hear music and food. And so it's just going to be a fun day.
Yes, we're going to have food there for you, for anybody that comes by. We're going to have, after the scanning and the digitizing and the meeting, for those that want to sort of stick around, and others are welcome to come later in the afternoon that same day, we're going to have a film screening. It's called Trip, UN Trip, Raul Salinas and the Poetry of Liberation. It's a short documentary, 28 minutes long, I think. And we'll have that film screening, and we'll have a discussion afterwards, and then we'll just continue to engage in fellowship and learn, and again, sort of just embrace community, embrace history, and embrace the learning or the love of learning history.
And I know that you're going to have a lot of future projects like this. Is there a website that you have that we can find out more information, or if you need volunteers, or if we can just call you and say, hey, I didn't make it to the event, but I want to preserve my family history? Can they get in touch?
Right. Yeah. So the best way to get in touch at present with us is through email. And on the flyer, there are 2 email addresses that are listed there. It's myself and my colleague, Dr. Carlos Cantu. The website is forthcoming. We're in stages now of developing the website. We're in stages now of developing a repository. We're in stages now of developing a podcast. We want to hold, like, we kind of want to emulate what you do and do these podcasts at least once a month to capture these stories. And so we got a lot of things in the works and a lot of things in development, but we welcome anybody who wants to share stories. We welcome anybody that wants to volunteer. We welcome anybody that wants to collab. They want to do collaborative projects with us. We welcome anybody who wants to become a member of this organization. It's called the Collective of Progressive Educators, or COPE. And so, but the best way to do so would be contacting us through the email addresses, that are located at the bottom of the flyer, the Bayou City Policing, the History Harvest Day flyer that is floating around the city and on social media.
Yeah. Dr. Esparza, we don't have much more time, but I know that you have a summer program coming up for kids also.
Yes, that is correct. So this summer, I am working, myself and several other educators and activists are working with the Magnolia Parks Arts and Community Impact, and they are hosting an Escuelita. This is a free community school that we're gonna launch. It's not brand new. This goes back all the way to the 1880s, when, again, ethnic Mexicans were finding ways to educate their own children, and they did it through escuelitas, translates into little small Spanish schools or Spanish speaking schools. But what we're going to do is we're going to have this free community school, and we're going to provide instruction in history and literature and writing, critical thinking to several high schoolers, most of which I think will come out of Milby High School. If not all will come out of Milby High School. But we're going to feed them breakfast. We're going to give them 2.5 to 3 hours of instruction. We're going to feed them lunch. We're going to combine history with literature, with history and literature with art, and vice versa. We got scheduled field trips. And so big shout out right to MPAC, or the Magnolia Parks Arts and Community, for hosting this. Big shout out to Desi. Desi is sort of like our leader here. She's the champ. We call her the principal. And but yeah, I mean, this is just a collective of people. I'm thinking of Dr. Stalina Villarreal over at the University of Houston downtown, who's going to be one of the instructors as well. And these are people who are not getting paid to do this. This is a labor of love. We believe in providing free education to our children so they can learn about our history, learn about our literature, learn about our contributors, those who have contributed to the scholarly development and the intellectual capacity of this community. And we want our students to know that. And they're not going to get it in HISD. They're not going to get that in schools K through 12. We're going to teach it to them. That's always been how we do it.
Yeah. And at the same time, they get to learn about themselves.
Absolutely. Self-reflection.
So, Dr. Esparza, is there a website where parents can register for this program?
So there is a website, and it's a tricky thing with registering. What I'll do is I will send your audience to the homepage for the Magnolia Park Arts and Community, or MPAC.
Okay.
Because that's probably the best place to go to learn more about this endeavor.
Okay.
And the website is actually very simple. It's magnoliaparksarts.org. And the organization is Magnolia Parks Art and Community. I wasn't saying and community earlier. Excuse me. Forgive me for that.
Yeah.
But it's Magnolia Park Arts and Community. And the website is magnoliaparkarts.org, O-R-G. And there they can see kind of the newest program that's being launched there at La Escuelita, is what we're calling it. And again, this is just a tradition dating back all the way to the 1880s, where we were advocating for ourselves and doing for ourselves and in the best interest of our children so that they can be lifelong learners. And that's where I would direct your listeners and viewers to.
Well, Dr. Esparza, I'm so sorry we're running out of time here. So what I would like to do is thank you so much for being here with us. It was a great honor to have you on the show. Hopefully we can get you back on. And thank you for working so hard to preserve our history and to make sure also that our kids are learning about our history. So thank you again for joining us. And as always, I'd like to thank you all as well. And as always, I'd like to thank you all as well for joining me. And if you have any comments, please let me know. If you have any story ideas, please get in touch.
Thank you.